We have a very interesting report to talk about. A report that we worked on for the last almost 2 years since the AR6 report started to be published in August 21 with the Working Group 1 report. And so what I'm going to do tonight is to give a general overview of our report. We published 13 chapters, and I can't even talk about all the chapters. That would be far too long. So I selected a few chapters and I give some general information about it. And of course, everybody then should read the full report for all the details, because there are hundreds of details in the report. It's 180 pages, sorry. And the good news, by the way, is that soon the report will also be available as an ebook and as a paperback version. And Andy May, my co-author, arranged all this, and I'm very grateful that he did that. So you already explained that I started Clintel with Guus Berghout in 2019. And internationally, Guus did most of the work, and it focused on the World Climate Declaration that most of you probably in the audience signed. And I was more doing the work in the Netherlands, and Guus was leading the international Clintel network. But when this new IPCC report came out, and with my experience with past IPCC reports, because I wrote a book in Dutch, The State of the Climate, in 2010, and that was dealing with the third and the fourth IPCC report. And as you told, in 2014, I published a very extensive report together with Nick Lewis for the Global Warming Policy Foundation about climate sensitivity. So these are the two. So the AR6 report consists of in total 7 reports, because there are also a few special reports, like the SR Special Report 1.5 degrees is also part of the AR6 cycle. But we concentrated on the Working Group 1 on the left and the Working Group 2 report, which is more about impacts. And so what is the IPCC about? The IPCC claims itself that their reports are comprehensive and balanced. So in a sense, what we did is we investigated if this is true. Are they really comprehensive and are they balanced? These are the persons who helped us doing the work. And so all of them contributed to one or more chapters. And I specifically want to highlight Andy May, because I think he worked so much, he did so much work for the report. And also now for publishing the book, that I really want to thank him for all his efforts. So this is the result, the frozen climate views of the IPCC, and we are now going to give some examples. This is our press release that you can find on the clintel.org website. And the conclusion we discussed a lot, because first we had as the headline of the press release, we first simply had the frozen climate views of the IPCC. But then I was discussing this with people in my group, and I was explaining what it was about. And then I said several times, okay, well, the IPCC made a lot of errors. And when I said that, okay, this should be the headline of the press release. So then we came up with this press release, and it was funny. We tried to just distribute it through our national press agency. So in France, you have AFP, in the US, you have AP, and in Holland, we have ANP. And so I contacted ANP, and I wanted them to distribute our press release by paying them. And they refused. And they refused because, they said, well, we cannot decide if this is correct. And so they didn't dare to burn their fingers on it. That's my conclusion. So today, well, here you see Mike's nature trick to hide the decline. I suppose that many of you know where this is coming from. This is coming from the ClimateGate emails. This was one of the most notorious phrases from from the ClimateGate emails. And here in a cartoon by Josh, it is explained what it was. It was that one of the proxy reconstructions, the blue one, went down after 1960, and then they simply cut it off in 1960, and they extended it with the measured thermometer measurements. And so this was hiding the decline. And they called this their nature trick. So what I will do today is show you some of the tricks that the IPCC is still using, according to us, in their current report. So trick number one is, well, during COVID, I read for the first time, I read the book 1984 by George Orwell, because I was thinking that in this COVID period, we were really like entering some sort of 1984 society. And of course, those of you who read 1984, you know that there is this Ministry of Truth. And what they do is that everything that is opposed to the big leader, that they will simply rewrite history. And our conclusion in the first two chapters, they deal with paleoclimatology. And our conclusion is that the IPCC indeed is erasing history or is rewriting history. And so in 1984, you have this slogan at the Ministry of Truth: war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. And I would like to add a new one for the IPCC, and that is warm is cold. What do I mean by that? Well, in the literature, and many of you will be aware of that, there is this period about 10,000 to 6,000 years ago, and it's called the Holocene climate optimum, or the Holocene thermal maximum. And this period is known to be quite warm. But of course, the question is, how warm was it? And according to the IPCC, it was not as warm as it is today, because, as you know, the IPCC came up with a new hockey stick reconstruction, about which I will talk in a second. But at the left of this side, you see the gray bar. And David explained me how I can, so the gray bar here. And it's written there that this is the warmest multi-century period in more than 100,000 years. So what they are claiming with this graph is not only that it's now, the warming now is unprecedented in the last 2,000 years, but also that it's now warmer than in the last 100,000 or even 120,000 years. So they actually claim that it is now warmer than during the Holocene climate optimum. Well, Javier Binos wrote the chapter about the Holocene, and he has, here is the claim by the IPCC. So global surface temperatures are more likely than not unprecedented in the past 125 years. And so this graph is from Javier in the chapter 1 of our report. And here is the original Kaufman et al. Reconstruction. And Javier showed this because the red uncertainty bar makes clear that even in their own terms, their claim is probably not correct. So it could have been warmer, even according to Kaufman, during the Holocene climate optimum, 6,000 years ago or 8,000 years ago. And in his chapter, Javier says, in conclusion, there is too much uncertainty in proxy reconstructions and instrumental temperature datasets to sustain with any degree of confidence that the present is warmer than the Holocene thermal maximum. And independent evidence from glacier and treeline changes supports the opposite assessment. And that's really interesting. So in the IPCC focuses a lot on proxy reconstructions based on tree rings and corals and ocean sediments, etc. And they simply try to average them using sometimes very fancy statistical methods. And Steve McIntyre, of course, has been paying attention to this for many years. But Javier showed other interesting, less difficult to understand evidence, historical evidence, like the tree line. I mean, we all know that if you go in the walking in the Alps, actually, I will go on Friday, I will go walking in the Italian Alps. And we all know that about 2,000 meters, you will cross the tree line. But we know from evidence that the tree line in the past was much higher in the Alps, but also in Siberia or Canada or Norway, Scandinavia. So, and during talks nowadays, during public talks nowadays, I like to show this picture from Switzerland. It's the Sustenpass in Switzerland. And here you see a picture taken about 20 years ago. And you see the glacier, and you also see how the glacier withdrew since 1850. And of course, this is all climate change, it's all CO2, etc. But there is a Swiss glacier expert, a scientist, and he made a reconstruction of the same area 2,000 years ago. And it looks like this. So it looks like this. The glacier was gone. And you see that the tree line was much higher. Here, you don't have any trees nowadays. But 2,000 years ago, you had trees all over the place. So at least in this area, it was definitely warmer 2,000 years ago than it was nowadays. And of course, this is only a local signal. But Sebastian Leuning, for example, he has this medieval warm period project where he summarizes evidence from all around the world. And you see that all around the world, you see warming 1,000, 2,000 years ago. And this is from McIntyre, from Climate Audit. This is a glacier in Norway. And you see that before 4,000, 5,000 years ago, there wasn't even a glacier. So during the optimum, it was simply too warm for the glacier. And the glacier only came into being later. And you see that it peaked during the Little Ice Age only very recently. So the retreat is not that special, you could say. Here is another glacier from Norway where you see the same pattern. And this is also from McIntyre. This is the Randland Glacier in Greenland. And McIntyre explains on his blog that this glacier is much more interesting than the GISP. Most of the people show GISP. A GISP is in the center of Greenland at high altitude. But the author of this graph is Winter, a guy named Winter, and he explains that the problem with the GISP is that you had a lot of altitudinal changes in the center of Greenland, which has, of course, influence on the temperature. And this glacier didn't have those altitudinal changes because it's it's near the coast. And this is the pattern you see. In my opinion, this is a much more realistic pattern of the Holocene. So you see a very quick warming after the Ice Age, and it is peaking about 8,000, 9,000, 8,000 years ago. And then from 6,000 years ago, it already starts the next phase. It's called the neoglaciation. So we are already slowly entering the new glacial period. And with tree lines, you see the same. Here's just one example from the Swiss Alps. And you see that the tree line was definitely higher thousands of years ago. And this is the key graph from the chapter by Javier. It's a complicated graph, but his reconstruction is based on the Marcotte reconstruction. It's based on proxies. I will show. It's this one. So this is the proxy reconstruction. So it's also and this is obliquity. So this is the Milankovitch cycle. And so the point is that really, especially on the northern hemisphere, the temperature and all the indicators are following Milankovitch. And here below, you see glacier advance. So if you see a bar, that means that there is a region. Black is the northern hemisphere, and blue is the southern hemisphere, and red is the tropics. And so when you see a bar, it means that a certain glacial region is extending. And you see that most of the extension is taking place in the last couple of thousand years. And here there was not much glaciation. So So this is the conclusion by Javier, that it is more likely than not that the past decade is warmer than any century during the past 12,000 years is an untenable claim. So this is the first claim of the IPCC that we try to correct. They try to rewrite history, and we try to correct the record. So the hockey stick again, this is the only, now we focus on the last 2,000 years. Steve McIntyre, I've been in touch with him a couple of times. He has been a bit bored about the whole hockey team and all the stuff. I mean, especially after ClimateGate, he saw how he was criticized in all these emails. He lost his interest a little bit, but still he has blogged about 4 articles about the new hockey stick. And the problem is always the same. We are not yet there, unfortunately, that we can fully reconstruct what they did. And one of the problems is that they don't give away the source code and exactly the data. And so it's not easy to really reproduce their result. But what he found out, and here you see in red, you see the IPCC hockey stick, the new IPCC hockey stick. And in black, you see a selection of proxies that is being used in the hockey stick, in the new hockey stick. And as you can see, many proxies don't show anything. So they're just like adding noise to the reconstruction, and only a few of them have a strong hockey stick shape. And so it's always the few of those and the statistical method that produce the final hockey stick. How they did it exactly, we still don't know yet. But hopefully McIntyre and other people will continue, and let's hope. I would like to make a separate project within Clintel to really reconstruct this. One example from McIntyre's blog, this is the proxy that was used by the IPCC on the top, a strong hockey stick shape. And when McIntyre used the same proxy data, but the standard way of processing the data, he got the results below. So something strange is going on with the processing of the data by the IPCC, but we are not yet, we are not there yet. Well, anyway, this is what McIntyre so far concluded about a new hockey stick. If you thought Michael Mann's hockey stick was bad, imagine a woke hockey stick by woke climate scientists. As the climate scientists say, it's even worse than we thought. So we go on with the second trick. And that is use shorter and shorter periods to claim a dramatic evolution. And the example we have there is from sea level rise. So what did they claim in the new report? They claimed an acceleration of the sea level rise. And how did they do that? They, as you can see here, they compared different periods. And the periods they compared become shorter and shorter. So they start with 1901, 2018. Then 1901, 1971, then 1971, 2006, and then 2006, 2018, which is a really short period, far too short to say something about trends in sea level rise because of this 18-year nodal period that you also have to deal with. And so this is the graph that they show. And here you see something other peculiar, and that is that you have this spaghetti graph. So they show many different studies. And well, you tend to assume that this is just data that you're looking at. So this is tide gauges, for example. And then in the recent period, it's maybe also combined with satellite data. But the problem is that here they also use a budget. For example, they use budget data. So they try to come up with, okay, the glaciers contribute so much and the warming of the oceans contribute so much. And then they make also a sea level time series by that. So that's not really data. That's totally different data than the tide gauges. And what they didn't show is that here at the bottom, you see this. This is a well-known paper by Fredericks et al. And what they didn't show, and I remember that Steve Koonin showed it in his lecture for the ICSF, is that the Fredericks et al. Paper also had this. And here you see, of course, on the left, you see the rate of change. So if you go up, the sea level is rising faster, and if you go down, it's rising slower. And here you see the decadal variation in the sea level rise. And this shows that it's far too early to conclude that there is really like an acceleration now of the sea level rise, and that it will probably take another 20, 30 years before you have more certainty about that. Okay, Ole Humlum, our Norwegian contributor, had a chapter about this sea level tool. So the IPCC, together with NASA, they made a sea level projection tool available, in which you can go to your favorite location and you can select one of the IPCC scenarios, and then you can do a sea level scenario for your region. And he did that in his chapter. He did that for a couple of stations in Scandinavia. And I'm just going to show one for Oslo. And here you see on the left, you see the trend, the sea level trend in Oslo. It's going down because of the glacial uplifting, the glacial rebound. And then from 2020, you see in blue, you see the projection of the IPCC sea level tool. And this is, of course, very funny. So they expect a dramatic change in the trend starting in 2020, the year that they start their projection tool. And you will see this when you try to do this for your own region. You will see also a jump in 2020. So, for example, in Holland, we have like a 2 millimeters a year sea level rise, but the projection tool predicts 4 millimeters starting in 2020. So this is quite funny, I would say, that they didn't even check this, and that they tried to correct this for the reality. Okay, we go on with trick number 3, and that is introduce new hybrid or blended data sets that immediately become the new golden standard. And this is from our chapter about snow cover. So Northern Hemisphere snow cover, we have good data. We have a lot of discussion about that. We know that in the spring, there is a decline in snow cover, which you can expect if the spring is getting warmer. But we also know from a paper by Ronan Connolly that in autumn and winter, there's actually even a slight increase. So we were curious to see what IPCC did with this information. Well, here is what they did. They came up with a brand new data set by a Canadian scientist named McKitrick. And this data set is actually a blended data set. So it's a mixture of 7 different data sets. And Willis Eschenbach, the blogger of What's Up With That, he's a good data guy. And I asked Willis, could you have a look at this data? He tried to download the data from the IPCC, but he failed. Only one of the data sets was available, the rest wasn't. And so McKitrick was a lead author or a contributing author, I forgot, but he was involved in the chapter. And so in the first draft of the report, he already introduced his new data set, while at the time his publication about this new data set was not even available. So it wasn't published, but it was already introduced. So expert reviewers, of course, cannot then check the material because, well, it's not published yet. Officially, you can then ask the IPCC for the data, for the publication, etc. But how many of us will do that? And so this is how they use the new data set. This is based on the McKitrick et al. 2020 paper. And what they now did is, based on this new blended data set, they now claim that, and you see that on the left, that in every single month of the year, there is now a decreasing trend. So there is no increase anymore in autumn. There is no increase anymore in winter. And again, this is not easy to check where this is coming from. The most well-known data set about snow cover is the Rutgers Snow Data Lab. This graph is from Ole Humlum's Climate for You site. I downloaded it today, so it's the most recent version. And as you can see, if you look at the data since 1972, not much is going on. Maybe there is a very, very, very small decrease in the data, but it's really not much. And there is a lot of variability. And so it was also interesting to look at the paper by Ron and Connolly. These are two graphs from the paper by Ron and Connolly. And here you see the autumn and the winter situation. So on the top, you see the data from the Rutgers Snow Lab, and you see the slight increase in this in these seasons. And below, at the bottom, you see what the climate models are predicting. So the main conclusion of Ronan's paper was climate models fail to correctly simulate the trends in the autumn and in the winter. And so it was also interesting whether the IPCC would mention Connolly and what they would say about it. Well, the good news is they mentioned Connolly et al., but this is what they said about the paper. The greatest declines in snow cover extent have occurred during boreal spring and summer, although the estimated magnitude is dataset dependent. And then they mentioned Connolly et al. This is hilarious, and this actually you could call one more trick by the IPCC, and that is, of course, a lot of skeptical papers or papers by skeptical scientists are ignored by the IPCC, but sometimes the papers are mentioned, but mentioned in such a way as if the paper confirms the IPCC conclusion, although the paper itself doesn't do that. And so this is quite interesting to see how they deal with that. Okay, then a very popular trick by the IPCC is hiding the good news. Well, Nick Lewis and I, when the report came out, either the working group 1 or the working group 2 report, this is the media attention. So it was code red for humanity, Gutierrez was all over the place, and the climate crisis inevitable, etc., etc. And so it's a lot of gloom and doom and gloom. And so when Nick Lewis and I wrote a report in 2014 about climate sensitivity, we called it a sensitive matter. And then we said how the IPCC buried evidence showing good news about global warming. Later, we heard that the climate scientists involved in the IPCC were really angry about this subtitle because it suggested some bad faith by the IPCC. And we were a bit surprised about that because, come on, guys, you claim all kinds of things, and when you get criticized, you cannot handle it. So, but anyway, there is, again, in AR6, there is a lot of good news. And what they do again is they try to hide it. They hide it by burying it deeply in the report. So you can find it on page 1687 or so, you know. And so they hide it in the summary for policymakers. And sometimes it's simply ignored, or it's just, they come up with the opposite claim. And we will show some examples. So I go into climate sensitivity very shortly, because this is a topic which in itself, I would say, would deserve a full lecture of 45 minutes. As you know, since Charney, the likely range for climate sensitivity was always 1.5 to 4.5. And in AR6, in AR5, it was still 1.5, 4.5 after it was 2 to 4.5 in AR4. And Lewis and I explain why they had to lower the lower bound to 1.5 again. This had to do with papers by Nick Lewis and other people based on observations since 8050. They point towards a lower climate sensitivity. And so we wondered, of course, Nick Lewis and I and other people, Judith Curry, we wondered, what would the IPCC do in AR6? And they came up with a spectacular result because they raised it to 2.5 to 4. So this means that the IPCC now claims that climate sensitivity is much more likely to be inside this narrow range from 2.5 to 4. And their best estimate is still 3 degrees Celsius. However, there is a paper by Nick Lewis and Judith Curry, and their approach is simply accepting everything from the IPCC. So they accept all the forcings, all the temperature increase, etc. And they accept that all the warming actually is due to the greenhouse gases. So it's a very conservative assumption that they use. And when they use this energy budget method, so such as it is called, then they still come up with an estimate for climate sensitivity that is in the 1.5 to 2 region, so not above 2.5. The new IPCC range was based on one paper by Sherwood et al. In 2020. And this paper, this is an example of a paper that is more or less ordered by the community, by which I mean that almost everybody who publishes about climate sensitivity was involved in this Sherwood et al. Review paper. It was a paper 100 pages. And so this paper also became the new golden standard immediately, and the new range in AR6 was based on this paper. Well, Nick Lewis then published a paper after the deadline of the IPCC, so after the publication actually of the IPCC, and he redid what Sherwood et al. Did. And when he did that, his estimate, based on the same method as Sherwood et al. Used, but based on updated data and some improvements in the statistics, his best estimate came down from 3.16 in the IPCC to 2 low in the 2 slightly above 2. And his conclusion is that climate sensitivity is more likely to be below 2 than above 2.5. So in this case, it was after the publication of the AR6 report that that there was really like already a correction in the literature that this estimate by the IPCC was wrong. So this is what we conclude in our report, that this rise of the lower bound to 2.5 is not justified. And we suggest that observed warming and other evidence indicates that the true figure is more likely to be below 2 than above 2.5. So Ross McKitrick wrote a chapter about the tropical hotspot. And of course, the tropical hotspot, many of you are familiar with that. That is one of the most significant warming patterns. High in the tropics, you should see amplified warming. And here he shows that both globally and in the tropics, the models overestimate the observed warming. So in blue, you see the observations, and in red, you see all the models, all the individual models, and the red bar on the right is the average of all the models. And in their paper by McKitrick and Christy, published in 2020, they show this plot. And so they show that there is a statistical significant difference between the models and the observations, both globally in the troposphere and high in the tropics. And what is interesting is that McKitrick and Christy made this graph where you see all these model values, the observed. So the model, the warming in the models in the troposphere and in the tropics, and then in the green circle you see what it should mean, what the values you see. I have to point this. These are the observations, the real observations. So this is for the lower troposphere and this is for the mid troposphere, and you see that this is the implied climate sensitivity. So his work for the tropics and for the global troposphere also indicates a climate sensitivity between 1 and 2 degrees Celsius. And the paper by McKitrick and Christy is also mentioned in AR6, and they also say that they conclude that it has to do something with climate sensitivity, but AR6 themselves, of course, don't draw this conclusion. So we go on with the extremes because that's really important. Of course, we hear every day about climate change will lead to more extreme weather. And this table you probably recognize from a blog or a talk by Roger Pielke Jr. It was drafted by Roger Pielke Jr. It was actually his summary of the AR6 report. So if you take AR6 at face value, accept everything they claim, this is what they claim about extremes. And to have the good news, you see that flooding, meteorological drought, hydrological drought, because they have now 4 categories for drought. Tropical cyclones, winter storms, thunderstorms, tornadoes, hail, lightning, extreme winds, all these things are claimed by the IPCC themselves. There's no detected trend, and so there is no attribution. You cannot attribute it to CO2. And this, of course, is very good news. Why is it good news? Because flooding and cyclones and storms are causing by far most of the damage. About 90% of the global damage because of due to extreme weather is caused by flooding and by hurricanes, by tropical cyclones. So the fact that these don't show a trend is really, really good news. And you would expect that news in the summary for policymaker. And what we show in our report is that they don't mention this in the summary for policymakers at all. Actually, they made a significant error in the about tropical cyclones. Well, here you see, you probably have seen this before. This is for the US, where you see a slight downward trend for landfalling hurricanes. And this is also funny. This graph has been published in a peer-reviewed publication. And we have now, in total, there are now 47 IPCC reports. Since 1990, there have been 47 IPCC reports. And a graph like this has never been shown in any of the IPCC reports. And so here is one of the conclusions of the IPCC about tropical cyclones. They claim now that there is a change in tropical cyclones. So TC is tropical cyclone characteristics. They say it's likely that the global proportion of category 3 to 5 tropical cyclones instances, so that there is an increase in heavy tropical cyclones. And here we show data by Ryan Mao. And well, you could say, okay, the upper part is all hurricanes, the lower is major hurricanes. Both don't show a real trend, but you could make the point that maybe all hurricanes are going down a little bit faster than the major hurricanes. So indeed, it could mean it could be that the proportion changes. But in the past couple of weeks, Roger Pielke has written several blog posts about this specific claim by the IPCC, and he has shown that they made a real error based on a paper by Cossin et al. And they confused measurements of tropical cyclones by the tropical cyclones themselves. And this led to, in steps, this led to a confusion in different drafts of the IPCC report. And ultimately, the error they made was not corrected, and it made it to the summary for policymakers. And this error now was admitted to him by one of the IPCC people. So I'm really eager to see how they are going to deal with this in the future, if they're going to correct this error by themselves. This graph, of course, you also know, it was published by Björn Lomborg, but you see it a lot on LinkedIn or Twitter, in social media, Facebook. But what people maybe are not aware is that Björn Lomborg published this graph in a peer-reviewed publication in 2020. So we looked if AR6, the Working Group 2 report, if they mentioned this paper. No, they didn't. And did they mention the data set? Because the data set is the MDOT data set. And yes, they mentioned the data set, but instead of showing this graph, they showed it in this way. So what they did is they took the period 2010-2020, and without giving numbers, they give only the different. So they show that in Asia and Africa, more people are dying from extreme weather than in North America or in Australia, etc. but they didn't show a very positive graph like this, showing a huge decline in mortality. We have more good news. Who controls the past controls the future. That's from George Orwell as well. And I mentioned this because when we deal with the future, of course, the IPCC uses scenarios. And this is one example of the scenarios. And this is for sea level change. And of course, you see the highest scenarios is SSP 8.5 and 7.0. And these scenarios can be quite dramatic. And as you probably are aware, in the last few years, people like Roger Pielke and Burgess and a couple of scientists, they have published a lot of papers about that these, especially the 8.5 and 7.0 scenarios, are not realistic. They are totally implausible. And of course, it was interesting to see what the IPCC did with these newspapers. Well, most of them were ignored by the IPCC. But what they did is interesting. This is from Roger Pielke. So they did two things. On the one hand, they said that, okay, in general, no likelihood is attached to the scenarios. So if a policymaker asks the IPCC, what is the likelihood of the different scenario? Which one is most likely? Then the IPCC will say, oh, we don't know. We cannot say, we don't have any judgment about that. But then at the same time, deeply buried in the report, they say that the likelihood of a high emission scenario such as RCP 8.5 and SSP 8.5 is considered low in light of recent developments in the energy sector. And that's really interesting. So they now admit in AR6 that the 8.5 scenario has a low likelihood, but they didn't mention this in the summary for policymakers. So I have no idea how a policymaker should be aware of this. The media is not bringing this news. Actually, in the Netherlands, at this moment, they are preparing the next scenarios for Holland, the KNMI scenarios. And I heard from people in the Netherlands that they are still using this RCP 8.5 scenario. For me, it's totally incredible, but they're still using it. So also in the Netherlands, people will be not aware of this. At the same time, this is also from Pielke, SSP 8.5 and RCP 8.5 were mentioned most of the times. Yeah, in 40. If they mention a scenario, in 41.5% of the times, it was a mention of the RCP 8.5. So the whole report is full with reference to RCP 8.5. Although we now know that this scenario is totally implausible. It's not going to happen. How can you understand that this is not going to happen? I skipped that one. Well, here is an example of the coal use in 2100. At the moment in 2020, we use 151 exajoules from 6,600 power plants, coal power plants. If you go to the 8.5 scenario in 2100, we need to build one new coal power plant every day until 2100. So an additional 32,000 additional power plants. And if you go to the 7.0 scenario, it's still 17,000 additional power plants. So both these scenarios are completely implausible. And here you see a paper by Burgess et al., a co-author of Pielke. And in their latest paper, they say that the most, because below 7.0, you have the RCP 6.0, RCP 4.5. That's so far that's a middle of the road scenario. But they, in their latest paper, they even say that the current path that we are on is even below that. It's even below 4.5. They say the most likely scenario is now 3.4. And 3.4, the 3.4 scenario is mentioned 0 times in AR6. It's not mentioned at all. And according to Pielke and Burgess, that could be at the moment the most likely scenario for the future. Okay, I go on quickly because I'm probably running out of time. Trick number 5, that is the good old cherry picking. And this is from chapter 12 in our report. And this is the most devastating error, striking example that we have found in the report. So if you watched the Pielke talk 1 year ago, also at the ICSF, then you might remember that he was talking about this. What was going on? Pielke Jr. is an expert in what they call normalized disaster losses. So we all understand that if you had a hurricane in 1900 in Miami, in Florida, then there was less damage than if you have a hurricane today. Because nowadays you have more people, you have more houses, you have more capital. So if you want to compare 2 hurricanes, you have to make a normalization of the data. And Pielke Jr. published a paper in 1998 with a method how you could normalize the data. And since then, about more than 50 papers have been published in literature. And Pielke in 2020, he thought, okay, it would be interesting to write a review paper about all the papers that have been published, because the IPCC AR6 report is coming up. And so I can do already the work for the IPCC. So he published this paper. And in his paper, he showed this table. And this table shows all the studies that were published. In total, it were 53 publications dealing with disaster losses due to extreme weather. Could be hurricanes, could be floods, could be fire, forest fire, etc. And of those 53 papers, only one, and it's in yellow here, the Grinstead et al. Paper claimed an increase in damage, and also it claimed that it could be attributed to CO2. And so what happened in the AR6 report, in the Working Group 2 report, is that the IPCC more or less ignored all 52 studies in this table, and they highlighted the Grinstead et al. Paper, then claiming an increase in disaster losses. And this is such an incredible form of cherry picking that even if you are a big fan of the IPCC, you have to admit that this is not how it should go. And people like Pielke, this is from another peer-reviewed paper by Pielke. This is showing with the same method what we know about the global situation. And as you can see, there is even a slight decrease in the disaster losses globally. Yeah, if you correct for global GDP. Yeah, so global GDP in this period increased significantly. So the damage also increases, but if you normalize the data, there is no increase. And so it's unlikely that climate change has anything to do with that at the moment. And well, in our report, we explained that Roger Pielke Jr., who was involved in, he is an expert on extremes. He's an expert on disaster losses. He is an expert on scenarios. So a lot of his work is highly relevant for the IPCC. And of course, I asked him personally, were you ever invited by the IPCC? They really treat him like Voldemort from the Harry Potter films. And when I asked him about this, he said, well, actually, indeed. And Andrew Revkin, the former New York Times correspondent, also made this comparison with Voldemort. And this is a quote from Pielke. And I highlighted in the bottom. Roger Pielke will never participate in the IPCC. That was said by an IPCC official from the US. And so, yeah, in my opinion, this is really the big problem in the IPCC. It is a biased approach because it's a matter of groupthink. They only invite people who already support the whole the whole paradigm that it's climate change, it's unprecedented, it's caused by CO2, and it's horrible, it's terrible. If you agree all those things, then you are willing to participate in the IPCC. If like Pielke is not even a climate skeptic. He accepts that CO2 is causing climate change. He wrote a book about climate policy. He's in favor of decarbonization, but still he is not in favor of exaggerating the science. He wants integrity of the science, and that's not even welcome in the IPCC. So to conclude, what's next? Because the report is out. So far, the media in the Netherlands and abroad are more or less ignoring it. It's not unexpected. People like Roger Pielke, Judith Curry, the Daily Skeptic in the UK, they paid attention to it. So we will go slowly. But what we did in the report is that we related our work to this Inter-Academy Council report. Some of you, maybe if you're new to the discussion, you don't know about the Inter-Academy Council. Well, back in 2010, we had some affair. We had ClimateGate, of course. And after ClimateGate, we had some errors discovered in the IPCC report. And then the Inter-Academy Council was asked to investigate the IPCC process. And they did a lot of recommendations. They were actually quite critical. And so now we are planning to send a letter to the IPCC. And in this letter, we refer to the Inter-Academy Council, and I will give you an example of the things that we write, that the IPCC commissioned a team with representation from Clintel and other independent persons not involved in the IPCC leadership to review whether the IPCC has fully implemented and followed the reforms recommended by the 2020 IAC review and whether more reforms are needed. And some other things that we request, that the IPCC review prominent statements by major world leaders, think about Gutierrez, and media outlets paraphrasing the contents of the AR6 and correct the record where those statements are misleading or inaccurate. Think about extremes. The climate's getting more extreme. No, many of the extremes are not increasing according to AR6 themselves. And the final one is that the IPCC meet with representatives from Clintel to receive input on the key deficiency highlighted in our report that require a formal correction. And so again, the book will be soon available, I think next week, as an ebook or a paperback. So you can go to Amazon or other suppliers and you can order. Of course, the PDF will be freely available on our website, but you can also go to buy a paperback or ebook version. Well, that was it for now. Thank you very much.